Dr. Hovind, I love your doctoral thesis. I've torn it to pieces with house and gaffle. I can't remember when I last pissed myself laughing. It's a good thing the thesis mopped the piss off the floor.
Welcome to part 18 of this read-through and peer review of Kent Hovind's doctoral dissertation, which was published on wikileaks.org on December the 9th, 2009. If you have not yet seen the previous installments in this series, then I recommend that you go back and see those first, as I will be starting off in this episode exactly where I left off in the last. In the last episode, Kent started laying into Voltaire. He continues in this one. He is also said to have scoffed at Sir Isaac Newton. Newton had been meditating on Daniel 12:4, which says,
"But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book. Even to the time of the end, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased."
Newton said that he believed that someday man would go more than 50 miles per hour. Voltaire picked up on this and laughed. He then travelled around preaching about the ridiculous ideas in the Bible to put such thoughts into Newton's head. Okay, Kent, there's two things wrong with that. The first is, can you show me exactly where in the Bible it states that man will go faster than 50 miles per hour? Secondly, it is rather apparent that you're not actually familiar with the works of Voltaire, are you? For a start, Voltaire was what was known at the time as a Newtonian. His works were very heavily influenced by Sir Isaac Newton and his ideas and philosophies, especially in the areas of optics and gravity. It might be worth you actually looking that up. In fact, come to think of it, it might have been worth you actually looking that up before you wrote your doctoral dissertation. Kent continues. Voltaire had a deist friend as a young man named Abbe de Chateauneuf, a bachelor and probably a homosexual. And how exactly is that relevant to your argument, Kent? May I just point out that Jesus, at the age of 33, was also a bachelor, which was practically unheard of in Jewish society at the time, and he hung around with 12 guys. I'll say no more. During the French Revolution, Voltaire tried to establish a 10-day work week instead of a 7-day work week, just to try to get people away from the 7 days of creation. This, of course, was a miserable failure. This is just an example of what he tried to do to get people away from the Bible and from Christianity. Yes, Kent, the government in place following the French Revolution did indeed change the length of the working week. In fact, they changed the whole calendar. The new calendar indeed had 12 months, but all the months have been renamed. Each month consisted of 30 days and was split into 3 weeks, each 10 days long. The Republican calendar actually lasted for 12 years, so it wasn't exactly an overnight failure. Other things that they brought in, such as the metric system for weights and measures, is still in use today. The reason for them doing all this has less to do with the Bible and more to do with revolutionary zeal. Kent continues. Another Frenchman during the time of turmoil of the 1600s and 1700s was a man named Comte de Buffon, brackets 1707 to 1788, close brackets. He was the director of the French Botanical Gardens for 50 years. He was also a prolific author. he wrote a 44-volume series on science called History of Nature. This is full of evolutionary ideas. Okay, Kent, why do you find that so strange? The guy was in charge of the French botanical gardens for 50 years, and he wrote a 44-volume series on science called The History of Nature. Evolution is a biological concept. Why is he going to fill his 44-volume series with bullshit from the Bible? At this point, there's a gap in the text, so we have to start the next sentence partway through. His writing before the French Revolution, he was very careful not to do things that would offend the Catholic Church. He was very influential in spreading the doctrine of evolution around the world. Yes, Kent, you would expect a botanist of such caliber, that he is the head of the French Botanical Gardens, to have such an influence. Okay, so now Kent moves on to define the term ad hominem attack. Another man that is very important as we trace the history of evolution is Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of Charles Darwin. He was born in 1731 and died in 1802. He was an extremely fat person. In fact, he was so fat they had to cut a curve in the dining room table so that he could get up to the table. He was a medical doctor. He was also very immoral. He had 12 legitimate children and 2 illegitimate children. He was known to have had many affairs. He was a great admirer of the French philosopher Rousseau, who was the chief philosopher of the French Revolution. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. That's exactly how to do a character assassination. How any of that, of course, is relevant to Kent's argument against evolution, we will never know. Kent continues, Darwin was a deist, not an atheist, but was a strong opponent of Christianity. That, of course, makes you wonder why, while he was inventing things, he ever invented, amongst other things, an organ able to recite the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, and the 10 Commandments. But Kent continues. In 1794, he wrote a book called Zoonomia, which contained many of the evolutionary ideas that were later claimed by Charles, his grandson. The United States and England were not yet ready to accept the evolutionary ideas because there was still such a strong Christian influence. About 65 years later, his grandson Charles would get credit for modern ideas of evolution. Erasmus Darwin founded the Lunar Society in Birmingham, England, in the late 1700s. Actually, Kent, I think what you'll find is that the ideas of evolution had been around for quite some time. They weren't new at the time of Darwin. They were quite popular and well known. What Charles Darwin is famous for, of course, is not coming up with the whole of evolution, but for coming up with the mechanism. That is, evolution via natural selection. In fact, if you'd done a proper study of the history of evolution, you would actually know this. But seeing as your study is actually just a load of religious twaddle about how it was Satan's idea, then of course you get it completely and utterly wrong.